Hello, I'm Simon Whistler, you're watching TopTenzNet, and in the video today we're looking at the top 10 crazy plans that actually worked. It's a staple of cheesy action movies and TV shows, a harebrained solution that is so outlandish that the protagonists just might pull it off. It's crazy enough to work, they'll always say. However, plans that seem wildly implausible but somehow manage to succeed don't only exist in the world of fiction. In the video today, 10 real-life crazy schemes, plans and ideas that were just wacky enough to actually work. Number 10. Sweeping up the cash. A group of French thieves found an enterprising way to clean out a chain of French supermarkets, literally. Due to the nature of their business, supermarkets tend to have a significant amount of cash on hand, and grocery store security protocols tend to be less stringent than other cash-heavy facilities, like, for example, banks. However, the larger supermarkets, those with a lot of money sitting around, still aren't easy targets for thieves. Generally, these stores employ some sort of vault to safeguard their cash until it can be picked up and taken to the bank, and for most thieves, breaking into a vault or safe quickly is a very difficult task. And here enters the Vacuum Gang, a group of French thieves who figured out a novel way to rob cash from Monoprix grocery stores on more than a dozen occasions. In total, they walked away with hundreds of thousands of euros. Rather than breaking into the vault, the thieves targeted the pneumatic tube system that delivered envelopes of money from cashiers to the store's vault. By drilling a hole in the tube and then using a powerful vacuum, the thieves were able to sweep up the cash before it ever reached the vault, and then they walked away, never being caught or identified. Number 9. Disguising embassy personnel as a film crew to sneak them out of hostile territory. The next plan is so crazy that it sounds like the plot of a movie, and in fact that movie would be Argo and is based on the true story of how the CIA, aided tremendously by the Canadian government, snuck 6 American consular officials out of Iran after the US embassy in Tehran was stormed. On November 4, 1979, the US embassy in Tehran was overrun by militant protesters. While more than 50 Americans working at the embassy were captured and held for more than a year during the infamous Iranian hostage crisis, 5 Americans working at the embassy and 1 working as a nearby attaché were able to escape without being detected. After a few days of moving from house to house, the group turned to the Canadian embassy for help. The Canadians gave them shelter at the embassy and at the ambassador's personal residence, while the CIA developed a plan to try and get the 6 out of Iran. There were a lot of reasons to doubt that a safe exit from Iran would be possible for the Americans. The Iranians were employing carpet weavers to reconstruct files that contained photos of embassy staff members so that they might discover that some personnel were missing from their group of hostages at the time. Plausible cover stories for the group, for example, that they were English teachers, that they were working for an NGO, or that they were agricultural inspectors, were unworkable. English language schools had been shuttered, the Iranian government carefully monitored foreign NGO personnel, and crop inspections wouldn't occur during winter. So the CIA, specifically Tony Mendez, who was the authentication chief of the CIA's graphics and authentication division, hatched an audacious plan to convince the Iranians the group was a Canadian film crew scouting locations for Argo, a sci-fi movie set in outer space. The plan required the CIA to set up a movie production office in LA, which they did, even taking meetings on other potential future projects, generate publicity around the film's production, Hollywood Reporter and Variety published articles around the plans for the film, and obtain Canadian passports that backed up their supposed plan. Canadian law forbids falsification of identification documents, but the Canadian Parliament met in secret to approve the first exception since World War II. In addition to procuring passports, the Canadians got copies of visa documents, established patterns of transit through the airport in Tehran, bought airline tickets, and coached the group in how to sound Canadian. Amazingly, this convoluted plan totally worked. The Iranian airport officials were fooled, the 6 Americans boarded the Swiss airplane that would take them out of danger, and once the plane was out of Iranian airspace, they celebrated with Bloody Marys. Number 8. Figuring out how to beat Press Your Luck. Many folks have dreamed of winning big on a game show. Michael Larson was one of them. However, unlike most people, Larson developed and executed a strategy that allowed him to rack up more than $110,000 in winnings on a single episode of Press Your Luck, which at the time, in 1984, was the largest haul by any daytime game show contestant in history. So how did Larson beat Press Your Luck? Well, to understand his victory, you need to understand a little about how the game worked. Contestants answered questions and were awarded spins spins around a board of illuminated squares that offered cash, prizes, and additional spins, as well as whammies. Land on a whammy, which were placed on 1/6 of the rotating squares, and you would lose all your accumulated cash and prizes and end your turn. The team that built the board believed that the speed and random nature of the board would prevent any contestant from accruing more than $25,000, with most winners leaving with about $14,000. However, Larson, who had long been drawn to get-rich-quick schemes, had a lot of time on his hands to analyze episodes of Press Your Luck. After months of viewing the show during the winter, he was an ice cream man who didn't work in the off-season, Larson figured out the game's secret flaw. The squares weren't actually randomized. Instead, there were 5 looping patterns, which, with the help of a VCR and practice with his remote, he memorized. Larson then spent the last of his savings on a ticket to LA, where he successfully auditioned for the show. During the first half of the show, Larson didn't do well, perhaps on purpose, but during the second half, he found his footing. Larson spun 45 times in a row without hitting a whammy, passing his remaining spins when he feared he was losing focus. While show executives panicked about his improbable winning streak, they were helpless to stop it. Even after the show, they determined that he was entitled to his winnings because he had not broken any of the show's rules, just exploited a glitch in the board that no one else had noticed. Immediately after the episode, the board was retooled and contestant winnings were capped at $75,000, stopping any other players from taking the luck out of Press Your Luck. Number 7. Dazzling the Enemy. It sounds like the exact opposite of how you should camouflage a military ship, by covering it with striking geometric patterns in bold, contrasting colors. But this dazzle camouflage was used by the British and then by the US to protect their ships, primarily during World War I. The idea behind dazzle painting, proposed by British artist Norman Wilkinson, was to confuse German U-boat gunners by using the patterns to make it hard to quickly determine the ship's size, speed, or direction. Because torpedoes were slow and expensive, a gunner generally only had one shot to hit his target, and an optical illusion that made him even slightly less precise could offer significant advantages to the target ship. During World War I, more than 4,000 British ships and 1,200 American ships were dazzled. The jury, though, it's still out on whether dazzle painting was effective at thwarting enemy attacks. Academic studies at the time suggested that the designs could distort course estimates enough in order to elude torpedo attacks, and there is even some evidence suggesting that dazzled boats may have been struck more often but less effectively by the enemy during the war. Insurance companies believed it worked, lowering premiums for merchant vessels that had been dazzled. The British Admiralty concluded that dazzling probably didn't hurt or help, but noted the improvement on morale on dazzled ships versus non-dazzled ships was reason enough to keep the painting. Those ships were mostly painted over in more traditional grey when the war ended. Number 6. Using a non-existent currency to bring inflation under control in Brazil. From the 1950s onwards, the Brazilian economy went through an inflationary period that caused turmoil within the country. By 1993, inflation had reached an incredible 2,000% a year. Brazilians would frantically rush to fill their fridges with food and their cars with gas as soon as they were paid, because prices would invariably be higher the next day and the day after that. Successive governments had failed to get inflation under control, and the Brazilian people lost faith not only in their government, but also in their currency. Finally, a new finance minister decided to call an economist for advice on how to rein in inflation. The economist, Edmar Bacher, and 3 of his longtime buddies from grad school proposed a plan that initially sounded crazy. In addition to reining in government spending, they also wanted to introduce a fake currency, which they called the URV, Unit of Real Value. The old currency would still exist, but all wages and prices would be listed in URVs. The only thing that would fluctuate is how many of the old currency a URV was worth. Even though there were no physical URVs, over the next few months, Brazilians they came to trust that URV prices would remain steady. At that point, the virtual currency became an actual currency known as the real. Inflation fell dramatically and Brazil's economy became much more stable. As one economist put it, Brazilians suddenly became capable of making plans for the future instead of having to live in the here and now. Number 5. Pretending to be mythical vampires to quell rebellion. From 1942 to 1954, the Hukbalahap rebellion, in which former soldiers rose up against the Philippine government, raged throughout the country. The CIA brought in Air Force Colonel Edward Lansdale to help assist the Philippine defense minister in subduing the rebels. Colonel Lansdale led a campaign focused on psychological warfare, including a plane that broadcast warnings from the voice of God. One of Lansdale's more inventive strategies involved exploiting local superstitions around the aswang, a terrifying mythical vampire that has been a staple of Filipino folklore for centuries. When a Huk rebel camp proved difficult difficult to dislodge through conventional means, Lansdale's Combat Psychological Operations Squad was brought in. It began by spreading rumors amongst local villagers of an Aswang sighting. Then, as Lansdale recounts in his book, the Psywar Squad set up an ambush along the trail used by the Hooks. When a Hook patrol came along the trail, the ambushers silently snatched the last man of the patrol, their move unseen in the dark night. They punctured his neck with 2 holes, vampire fashion, held the body up by the heels, drained it of blood, and put the corpse back on the trail. When the Hucks returned to look for the missing man and found their bloodless comrade, every member of the patrol believed that the Auswang had got him, and that one of them would be next if they remained on that hill. When daylight came, the whole Huck squadron moved out of the vicinity. While this is the only reported instance of American operatives impersonating vampires, local superstitions were also used during the Vietnam War when the US broadcast a recording called The Wailing Soul, in which spooky music overlaid a purported conversation between the wandering soul of a dead Vietnamese soldier and his daughter. Number 4. Escaping from prison in a helicopter. Joel David Kaplan, a businessman from a wealthy New York family, found himself in a precarious position. Despite substantial irregularities in the evidence, he was convicted of killing his business partner and sentenced to 28 years in a Mexican prison. After his appeals were denied, Kaplan, who maintained his innocence throughout, knew that his only chance of getting out was to escape. Several unsuccessful escape plans were attempted, trying to escape en route to the hospital after feigning illness, having a tunnel dug to provide a route out of the prison, sneaking out in a disguise, and hiding inside one of the truck compartments that were manufactured on site at the prison. In the end, the escape plan that got Kaplan out of prison seemed like the most far-fetched scheme of all. Kaplan, along with another prisoner, escaped by helicopter. While most of the prisoners and guards were occupied watching a movie, the chopper touched down in the prison yard, and Kaplan and his fellow prisoner just ran out, grabbed on, and flew away without even triggering an alarm. The helicopter took them to a nearby plane, on which Kaplan and his pilot flew across the border into Texas and presented themselves to US customs officials. The best part of the plan is that since escaping from jail is not a crime in Mexico and the 2 men were honest with US customs about their identities, there were no crimes committed in the eyes of the US government. US authorities showed little interest in extraditing Kaplan, who was rumored to have been working with the CIA on the basis of his dubious murder conviction, so after his crazy escape, he was free to go. Kaplan's helicopter-assisted jailbreak was the first of its kind, but many other attempts have followed with mixed success. Number 3. Using lunar gravity, duct tape, and a sock to get astronauts back to Earth alive. Houston, we've had a problem. Those iconic words spoken by astronaut Jim Lovell aboard the Apollo 13 moon mission marked the beginning of a frantic effort to get the 3-man crew aboard the shuttle back to Earth safely after one of the ship's oxygen tanks exploded and 2 of the spacecraft's 3 fuel cells were lost. The crew quickly moved to the tiny lunar module to preserve electrical energy, while NASA personnel on the ground devised plans to keep the 3 men alive for 4 days in a lunar module that had been designed to support 2 men for 2 days. The most pressing problem was developing a way to remove carbon dioxide from the module. Square canisters of lithium hydroxide could clean the air, but they wouldn't fit into the round openings on the lunar module. Mission Control devised a workaround to get the canisters to fit using materials on board the module, including an instruction book, a piece of plastic garment bag, a tube sock, and duct tape. The other key problem was getting the spacecraft back to Earth with the fuel that remained. Mission Control directed the astronauts on a precise firing of the spacecraft's engines in order to use lunar gravity to slingshot the craft around the moon and get in a return trajectory. On April 17, 1970, the crew safely returned to Earth, and a jubilant nation celebrated the ingenuity and tenacity that allowed the astronauts to make it home in one piece. Number 2. Holding back the sea. It sounds like a recipe for disaster, having one of the world's most densely populated countries situated largely on a low-lying floodplain right next to the ocean. Oh, and also add to that the fact that the land is crisscrossed by rivers. However, despite serious floods in its history, the Netherlands has largely succeeded in using an elaborate system of canals, dikes, and reservoirs to hold back the sea. Early Dutch settlers relied on dikes to protect them from the sea and rivers, and then windmills were constructed to power drainage ditches and canals to make the land suitable for agriculture and safe for habitation. Today, Dutch flood management has become much more sophisticated, incorporating storm surge barriers such as the Maeslantkering, a giant set of floating doors in the waterway that connects the North Sea to the port city of Rotterdam. If a storm surge of more than 3 meters is anticipated, the doors automatically shut to protect Rotterdam's harbour and the surrounding towns. The national government has also worked to reclaim fields and canals in order to serve as reservoirs in the event of a flood and as usable public space during other times. As Rotterdam's climate chief explained, for the Dutch, finding strategies to deal with the water that surrounds the country has long been a top priority. He said, "It's not just a bunch of dikes and dams, but it's a way of life." Number 1. Facilitating kidney swaps. Donating an organ to someone who needs it to survive is quite literally giving the gift of life, and it's a gift many are waiting for. As of 2016 in the United States, more than 120,000 people were on the wait list for an organ transplant, with more than 100,000 of them waiting for a kidney transplant. Unfortunately, there just aren't enough kidneys for all of those who need them. In 2014, only about 17,000 donor kidneys, about 11,500 from deceased donors, were available in the US, and more than 8,000 people who were waiting for a kidney either died or became too sick for a transplant while they waited. Many patients suffering have friends or family members who are willing to donate a kidney to them, and in the US, about 1/3 of transplanted kidneys come from living donors. But sometimes, about 1/3 of the time, the willing friend or family member isn't a match. This used to stop the process. The recipients would have to continue waiting for a kidney from a deceased donor, which isn't ideal, both because of the delays inherent in the waitlist, as well as the fact that kidneys from living donors last almost twice as long after transplant. In 1991, South Korean doctors began solving this problem through a strategy that sounds a little off the wall at first. They were facilitating kidney swaps. It goes like this. Patient A's loved one, who was not a match with patient A but was a match with patient B, would donate their kidney to patient B, and patient B's loved one, who matched patient A but not patient B, would donate to patient A. While this was a big step forward, it still left some people out, as a match was needed on both sides. A computer matching program was created in order to make domino chains of kidney donations, an even more audacious undertaking. An altruistic donor, unrelated to any recipient, kicks off the chain by donating a kidney, and a series of matched donations from loved ones to unrelated recipients ensues, ending with a final recipient who lacks a willing living donor. In 2012, a chain involving 60 surgeries over 5 months resulted in 30 kidney transplants across the United States. In 2015, an even larger chain resulted in 34 successful kidney transplants, setting a new record. By allowing living donors to trade their kidneys to secure one for a loved one, the domino effect allows more lives to be saved, both by increasing the number of living donors who are able to help a loved one in need, and by reducing the pool of people on the wait list for a kidney from a deceased donor. So I really hope you found that video interesting. If you did, please do hit that thumbs up button below. Don't forget to subscribe for more videos just like this every day of the week. There's a button below me as well as on the screen now. Also over there, a couple of other videos that you might enjoy if you enjoyed this one. And thank you for watching.